Good morning, all. First, I would like to thanks to the organizing committee for this invitation. For me, it's a pleasure to be here at the Minho University in this international conference of early childhood education, what science has to teach us, and actually science has to teach us a lot. And most of all, sharing with you a recently funded and launched collab in the field of childhood, the Pro-Child collab, led by Professor Isabel Soares, who is here, from the School of Psychology, that aims to drive science-based public policies and practice to improve the lives of children that are facing poverty and social exclusion. So, regarding statistics, we know that poverty and social exclusion prevent more than 200 million children worldwide from attaining their developmental potential. According to the Eurostat, in 2016, around 26% of children in the EU were at risk of poverty or social exclusion, with poverty rates being higher in the childhood group with comparison with other age groups. In Portugal, in 2016, the risk of poverty in childhood was around 22%, although in the last week, some new numbers reported a decrease in these statistics, so a decrease to a rate of 80% regarding child poverty in Portugal. Considering that family and social environments are major predictors of child well-being, exposures to early adverse environments place these children at disadvantage. So this leads to long-lasting negative developmental consequences that impact adult functioning and care for the future generations and ultimately the well-being of our societies. Nevertheless, poverty is not just a lack of money. It is a multidimensional phenomena that is linked to social exclusion and lack to access to services, including childcare, high-quality education, and adequate housing. In the case of children, this includes not only being able to participate in social and cultural activities with their peers, which makes inequality not only as the root of the poverty, but also one of its consequences. So more just being an issue of individual development, poverty and social exclusion are complex social problems that must be conceived and investigated in relation to political questions raised about social citizenship from the perspective of children. So the deleterious effects of poverty on child development have been very well established from the psychological or psychosocial research, with poverty being identified as one of the most powerful risk factors to predict poor developmental outcomes. So children from poor families do less well than children from higher income families across a wide spectrum of conditions, including developmental, education, health, and other outcomes. Specifically and regarding health, studies have been documenting that childhood obesity and asthma are 40 and 30% more prevalent than among poor families in comparison with higher income families, and children from poor families are 4 times more likely to be in fair or poor health. In terms of education, there is a high-grade repetition and dropping out of high school, and are more likely to have very low food security and become teenage mothers. It is also associated with poor cognitive outcomes as language, vocabulary, executive function, cognitive control, increased impulsivity, but also school performance and school attainment, as well as is associated with higher risk of psychopathological problems or behavioral and emotional problems. So the social, economic, and other environmental childhood risks associated with poverty, such as less stimulation, enrichment, or excessive stress in these environments, are widely described to affect brain development. In particular, studies have been documenting that a dysregulation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenocortical system, a very important system connected with the stress response and linked to the limbic system associated with emotion regulation and emotion processing, as well as changing the patterns of electrical brain activity in relation with cognitive processing, have been documented in children exposed to deprived environments. Nevertheless, the foundations of brain architecture are laid down early life through dynamic interactions of genetic, biological, and psychological influences in child behavior. So biological and psychological influences affect the timing and pattern of genetic expression via epigenetics, which can alter brain structure, function, and ultimately behavior. So these translational processes influence how risk factors and stress affect brain development, the extent and nature of deficits depending on timing, co-occurring or cumulative influences, and differential reactivity. So in this table, we have some examples that illustrate the effects of risk exposure in brain and behavioral development that varies according timing, meaning the timing in which they are exposed to these conditions. So extrinsic and environmental influences have maximum effect on brain and behavioral development during specific ages, which is linked to the sensitive periods of development. Co-occurring or cumulative influences, that is related with exposure with those, and the effects of differential reactivity that has to do with the effects of risk and protective factors on brain are moderated by child and individual and contextual characteristics. So we have here some examples how timing, co-occurring or cumulative influences and differential reactivity may be associated with different developmental outcomes. Finally, risks can co-occur and persist. So in these deprived settings, we can have multiple types of risks, including biological risks, but also social and other environmental risks, leading to exposure to multiple and cumulative risks. For example, maternal depression increases the risk of low birth weight, stunting, and insecure attachment, but because of differential reactivity, the effects of risk on behavior might vary by individual or environmental characteristics. So in this model, we can observe the balance between the effects of risks and the effects of protective factors moderated by these translational processes as timing, dosage, and individual characteristics on the brain structure and function. So we have here the central nervous system neurotransmitters and the response that depends upon the integrity of these circuits and the integrity of these systems. So all of these will impact in the patterns of the brain development and the final outcome of child development inequality. So we can have here a circuit in which we have the risks that are promoting, moderating by these variables, the child development inequality. In fact, major advances in neuroscience show how exposure to biological and psychological risk factors prenatally during early childhood mostly affects brain structure and function and compromises children's development and subsequent developmental trajectory. In this figure, we can see how risks and protective factors encountered before age of 5 compromise children's development. So the greater the exposure to cumulative risks, the greater the inequality, suggesting that early interventions here that prevent inequality are more effective than later interventions, which attempts to remedy the cumulative deficits in particular that affect this brain development. And studies are wide, and there are several studies that assess the impact of poverty in brain development and have been showing that in comparison with children from high social-economical status and in comparison with low and middle social-economical status, they have a lower average total gray matter. So you can see here the curvatures. And in this study, the authors also observed that although they have this decreased, the low social economical status, they have a decrease in the total gray matter of their brain, they start at the same point. So it suggests that as if infants aged and presumably have increased exposure to environmental risks, the differences in brain volume between poor and higher income became wider. So they differentiate more at later ages. So they start from the same point and they differentiate their patterns of brain development and brain volume along ages. We can see here that the curvatures of the gray matter trajectory are also different. So they have an increased growth trajectory in the higher social economical status of the total gray matter volume that differs significantly from the lower and middle social economical status. These authors also examined whether there were specific regions that were more vulnerable to the effects of poverty and in particularly to these environments. And they found that children from poor and near poor households were additionally found to have significantly lower average frontal gray matter volumes and reduce the frontal gray matter volumes in this specific region, the frontal lobe, in regions that are important for language and social cognitive tasks, impulse control, and control of attention, as it is the frontal lobes. They also found the parietal gray matter. There was a decrease in the parietal gray matter in these in these infants from lower and middle social economical status that was different also from the higher social economical status. So this unique data suggests that low social economical status environment influence the rate of human infant brain development. These authors show that these smaller brain volumes were also associated with behavior problems. So, sorry. So when they analyzed the relation between these volumes and a scale that assesses externalizing behaviors, they found that the smaller the brain volumes in these regions were associated with decrease, with more externalized behaviors and more behavioral problems. So these studies have been in accordance with other studies that documented this decreased gray matter volume in these in infants and children exposed to poverty, but other studies have been also documented a particular effect on two brain regions that are regions involved in the limbic system, that is the amygdala and the hippocampus. So these regions are associated with memory and with emotional memory, with emotional regulation, and they are very important for these self-regulatory behaviors. But decreased hippocampal volumes have been found in other studies of adults and children who experienced higher levels of childhood stress or childhood trauma, which is in accordance with these results of deprived environments. So in spite of this brain hippocampal amygdalar effect, a positive impact of early supportive parenting has been documenting in moderating the impact of environment in the alteration of the brain's structure. So this is a moderator, the nurture and the caregiving and the quality caregiving is moderating the impact of adverse environments in the final outcome. So caregiving may be a buffer and regulatory system that moderates the interaction between genes and the environment, in this case the exposure to poverty and social exclusion for the brain, emotional and behavioral development. So in this study, this is a recent study in which the authors investigated whether income to needs ratio experienced in early childhood impacted brain development at school age. So results showed that poverty was associated again to white matter and gray matter decreased the cortical thickness, so total brain area was reduced in these children, and that hippocampal and amygdalar volumes were the effect on hippocampal and amygdalar volumes were mediated by two variables, the stressful life events and the caregiving behaviors that was positively predicting the children's left hippocampus volumes. For the right hippocampus volumes, only the caregiving behavior is associated, was a truly significant mediator. So the current findings of this study have to and extend the literature underscoring the critical role of nurturance for childhood well-being. Therefore, when this does not occur and severe forms of parental deprivation are existing, as it happens in the case of institutionalizing, these effects are very dramatic in terms not only of the brain, but also behavior and social relationships. Recently, research has renovated the interest in the study of children exposed to extremely adverse environmental conditions, initially due to the fall of the communist regime in the Eastern Europe, which has revealed an extremely high number of children exposed to global and severe conditions of parental deprivation. And we have several studies from the English and Romanian adoptee study team, the international adoption of Romanian children, the Bucharest Early Intervention Project, the Greek orphanage studies, and the St. Petersburg studies that document a severe and dramatic effect of institutionalization in the several areas of children functioning and developing. So studies have been described delays in physical growth, motor development, cognitive and language development, and in neuroendocrine and functioning and social, emotional, and behavioral domains, which have been also described by our research team. We can see also the impact of institutionalization in brain function. So in these graphs, we have a kind of schematic representation of the brain activity. In dark blue, we have patterns of increased brain activity, in light blue, a decreased brain activity. So we can see that the amount of brain activity before the age of 2, it's much more lighter than when the children are moved to foster care before the age of 2. So if they are not moved to foster care before the age of 2, they display a kind of cortical hypoactivation, a decrease in the function of the brain because they are not put in a context of or in a familial context. So in Portugal, residential care or institutionalization is the main response to those children removed from their parents, despite national and international research, as we saw before, showing the severe and deleterious impact of institutionalization in children, and recommendations from European institutions against it. Despite we have these recommendations, the residential care is still a response to our children. So in 2016, around 8,000 children were deprived of adequate parental care and were living in residential homes in our country. In contrast, only 261 children were living in foster families, and of those, only 18 were less than 5 years old. So according to the guidelines for the alternative care of children endorsed by the United Nations, the placement of young children in residential care should be restricted to a short-term emergency measure or planned stays that should not exceed the 6 months, and always as a last resource. So it's widely documented, as we saw, that institutionalized in children is severe, or the impact is severe, including severe medical, physical, and brain growth problems, cognitive and academic difficulties, and emotional and behavior complications, which has been documented by our studies, but also reporting important alterations in terms of brain development. So in this study, I'm going to share with you some results that we have published in children raised in institutions in Portugal, in which we used electroencephalogram, EEG, during while processing faces. So these children were put a cap with the EEG, and they were visualizing faces of the preferred caregiver in contrast with the face of a stranger. So we were seeing specific components which are called event-related potentials. They are related to the presentation of specific faces, and we analyzed P1, it's a positive component that occurs at around 100 milliseconds post-stimuli, and is related with the spatial characteristics and perceptual characteristics of the stimuli, and the N170, that is a negative wave that occurs at around 170 milliseconds post-stimuli, and it has been described as a marker for face familiarity. So it has to do, it increases the wave when the child, the infant or the adult recognizes that that face is familiar. So it has associated also with memory for that stimuli. In these children, in this study, we characterized children in terms of their atypical social behavior with an interview, and they were categorized as displaying typical social behavior, not scoring in the clinical cutoff of that scale, or with a typical social behavior. And one of the most frequent behaviors or a typical social behavior observed in institutions is children that are withdrawn and present an inhibited subtype. The other classification that we did was the indiscriminate profile. That means that these children don't usually have a preferred caregiver. They go and look for social interaction with others, and they were classified so in typical social behavior and atypical social behavior. In terms of a typical social behavior, if they were from the inhibited subtype or from the indiscriminate subtype. So this is the sample. You can see here that we have 25 children with typical social behavior, 10 from the inhibited behavior, and 5 with the indiscriminate behavior, being this indiscriminate behavior a more pervasive form of altered pattern of behavior. So our results show, so we analyzed while they were viewing the face of the stranger versus the face of their preferred caregiver that was previously characterized with the caregiver, we found that children with a typical behavior, that is both indiscriminate and inhibited, compared with children without this atypical behavior, displayed the pattern of cortical hypoactivation as reflected as this reduced amplitude of the P102, a very important and ubiquitous social stimuli as faces. So they display a generalized decreased activation or brain activation to the faces, independently of they were stranger or the caregiver faces. So face is not so salient for them as would be to a typically developing individual. These results resemble this cortical hypoactivation that I showed you before and already observed by others studying institutionalized children. What is new in our finding is that institutionalized reared children vary in their neural responses to facial stimuli depending on if they display or no atypical social behavior. So in a second step, we compared the neural pattern of children displaying inhibited versus indiscriminate behaviors. So we found that children with inhibited behavior displayed greater neural response to the caregiver's face when compared with the stranger face, where no difference was observed for those children showing indiscriminate behavior. So children with inhibited behavior, contrary to what would expect or what should be expected in terms of the normative development, because in normative development there is a shift in the type of the response to the stranger. It's a different pattern in terms of the response to the caregiver and strange face. And these children with inhibited behavior allocate significantly more neural responses to processing the caregiver face than stranger face. This atypical pattern may reflect that within this particular context of institutionalization, children perceive the caregiver's face as much more relevant social stimulus than unfamiliar face, as the caregiver is critical in this context for their survival. So on the other hand, these children with indiscriminate behavior don't differ the stranger face and the familiar face in terms of their neural response, which is in accordance with their behavioral phenotype. And we did some other research with a developmental disorder, a genetic neurodevelopmental disorder, also characterized by these indiscriminate behaviors, and we found that there were no differences between these children with indiscriminate behavior and Williams syndrome, that is this genetic condition. So from these studies, we observed that experiences children have in their early lives and the environments in which they have them exert a lifelong impact. These experiences shape the developing brain architecture and influence how and what genes are expressed over time. So this dynamic process affects whether children grow up to be healthy, productive members of the society, but this is not to suggest that compromised beginnings cannot be turned around. Indeed, children's resilience is a powerful reality, achieved when protective factors, particularly a stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, a supportive caregiver, an adult, outweigh their risk. So the neurobiology of brain development clearly shows that it is easier, more efficient, and more cost-effective to build strong beginnings than is to facilitate repairs later in life, when brain architecture is less malleable and neuroplasticity is much more difficult. So as Ekman states, it's possible to remediate rather than to intervene early, but it's also much more costly. Specifically, intervention in early years by societies and countries have the potential to promote multiple benefits as sustained economic efficiency, reduced lifetime inequality, increased job opportunities in terms of and increased opportunities in terms of schooling, quality of learning, and work productivity, and better outcomes as physical growth, health, and decreased mortality and morbidity. So in the second part of my talk, I will present the Pro-Child Collab. So in order to respond to these unavoidable challenges, this collab, coordinated by Professor Isabel Soares, was designed to adopt an holistic concept integrating an intersector collaborative network of partners coming from different disciplines and different sectorial areas of our society. The Pro-Child Collab will foster the interests of several stakeholders, public and private leaders across the political spectrum and from different fields of action: justice, welfare, child protection, education, and will offer an unprecedented opportunity to craft a science-based transition into more science-based practices and programs. So in the following slides, I will present the motivation, strategic vision, scientific and technical relevance, and present a case study of an experimental living lab. So this is the outline of the Pro-Child, and why this is a response. So the current scenario, I already addressed that Portugal is one of the countries with higher income inequality in Europe. There is a high percentage of children living in poverty, and the number of children in poverty exposed to violence has also been increasing. The current response that we have, it's intervention programs that are non-integrated, ad hoc, and insufficient. They have almost inexistent evaluations of this program's implementation, and they lack a multi-sector and scientifically informed perspective. So the current response is insufficient and inadequate to tackle the current scenario that is alarming and dramatic. So the proposal is an integrated national strategy against child poverty that includes an integrated multi-sector approach in bridging the gap between public and private sectors, research-based, linking academia researchers from a wide range of scientific and technological areas with on-the-ground stakeholders around a common innovative agenda around the child, consistent scientific training of professionals, and evidence-based public policies. And all of this is grounded in the concept of living labs. And living labs, as a research concept, advocates this facilitating environment for the development, validation, and testing of innovative initiatives, including new technologies, services, products, and systems, all grounded on a vivid collaboration between a set of different agents with complementary skills and knowledge. So, this is the rationale underlying the ProChild that is based on a truly collaborative work between universities, IT centers, and private companies, public entities, associates, and partners. This network will allow the implementation of co-creative design, co-design process in real-life settings using a multi-method and interdisciplinary approach, promoting user engagement, applying people, user-centered, and participatory design methodologies, which is supported by action research. So the main principles of a living lab. So the ProChild Collab is a non-profit private association of academic, public, and private entities focused on children up to 10 years old living in poverty and social exclusion. So bringing together leading researchers and other professionals from a wide range of scientific and technological areas around a common research and innovation agenda, the ProChild Collab will link technology and social intervention by applying these promising methodologies of living labs. So it will implement innovative transdisciplinary projects with psychological and economic impact, aiming to promote public policies based on scientific evidence. So it will be an integrated and financially sustainable platform bridging the gap between public and private sector with accountable and metrics-driven project-based services which can be scaled in size but also in complexity. So the ProChild Association integrates two areas: a social intervention area grounded in 4 fundamental units, so health and well-being, development and education, social participation, and child protection. And the social technology area that includes living labs anchored on a digital unit and on a nanotechnology unit. So in the social intervention area, the ProChild will be enrolled in development of innovative and well-focused projects defined by this consortium to answer specific objectives within a geographic area and within a time frame. So the social intervention area is organized in these 4 articulated units: health and well-being, that the main aims is to promote pre- and neonatal public health care, child mental health and parental relationships, and to promote programs that tackle child's nutrition and physical activity. One of the other units is development and education, which the short-term goals and aims is to promote early care through a new educational approach to children from 0 to 3, and promote school achievement and social competence in preschool and school children. The other unit is social participation, which fosters the involvement of children and adults in co-designing innovative architectural, urbanistic, social, and educational projects. And finally, the child protection unit that aims to promote quality in the child protection system with new assessment and intervention models, and to promote public policies assuring child protection and welfare. The other unit is the social technology unit that operates on a living lab and is anchored on these 2 subunits, the digital technology and nanotechnology, that encompass the creation and development of different solutions, programs based on these digital and nanotechnology devices, such as apps and biosensors that will be user-centered and explored by different stakeholders in order to be tested in real scenarios in these experimental living labs. So the ProChild Collab will be able to integrate a wide range of different information and use it to develop a vast array of innovative solutions such as hubs, nanosensors, and tracking devices that will be helped to design and implement the different intervention programs defined for each of the 4 units of the social intervention area. So the ProChild Collab includes 17 associates and 13 partners, 17 associates from academic entities, public entities, private entities, and foundations and associations. From the academic entities, we have University of Minho, Porto, Aveiro, Coimbra, Centro de Estudos Sociais, Faculdade de Psicologia da Universidade de Lisboa, Instituto Superior de Economia e Gestão, Universidade Nova de Lisboa, Universidade Católica Portuguesa. From public entities, Câmara Municipal de Guimarães, Comissão Nacional de Promoção dos Direitos e Proteção de Crianças e Jovens em Risco. From private entities, SONAI, Pedrosa e Rodrigues, Irmãos Rodrigues e o grupo DST, and the foundations and associations Santa Casa de Misericórdia de Lisboa and Fundação Vasco Vieira de Almeida. So these are the associates, the ones that I read aloud, but we have different partners and different organizations involved also. So in terms of the research and innovation agenda, the ProChild Collab has an action plan that targets public policies, dissemination, evaluation, implementation, and research and technological development. Regarding public policies, it aims to promote and to foster recommendations and guidelines, systematic advocacy actions for legal and social policies. Regarding the action plan for dissemination, it aims to develop a web-based platform with a ProChild observatory and that will configure it as a research center for assessment and intervention. Regarding evaluation, it aims to develop and to assess interventions, effectiveness and socio-economic impact using an interdisciplinary approach. Regarding implementation, so the ProChild aims to implement several cross-sector and evidence and scientifically informed based programs, and it aims also to develop a multi-level and interdisciplinary research and innovation hub. In terms of impact, it will foster corporate social responsibility. It will develop a large portfolio of programs for companies of all sizes, child protection, gender equality, health promotion. It will be scientifically robust as it will be science-based programs ready for implementation. It will have clear key performance indicators and measurable return of investment, which will support private companies to measure their corporate social responsibility initiatives, and it will be off-the-shelf scalable intervention programs that integrate children's rights into private and public policy initiatives. And this will be with the active involvement of Fundação Vieira de Almeida, SONAI, Pedrosa e Rodrigues, and Irmãos Rodrigues, in which the CSR interventions will be expanded through GRACE and ACT. So by delivering creative, workable and scaled up interventions that promote child well-being, the ProChild Collab foresees as a long-term impact to be recognized as a site reference in the poverty and social exclusion in childhood within the European context. So building on already existing international collaborations of some partners, namely in Portuguese-speaking countries, the Collab foresees to scale up some of the interventions also in these territories. So the current involvement of the development of childhood education programs in the Republic of Guinea-Bissau and in Saint Tomé and Príncipe under UNICEF and in close collaboration with national governments are promising points of departure to reach dissemination and internationalization on medium and long-term goals. Other examples are the implementation, training and research of the incredible years in Portugal, which allowed the creation of a network that will be nurtured and expanded to other contexts. So the involvement of the various actors of the Pro-Child or within the Pro-Child initiatives, namely society, institutions, and academia, will help to bring scientists and professionals together within a national integrated structure where high-skilled scientific trainee and employment will be fostered. There will be an innovative multidisciplinary projects in the social field, disseminating findings in high-ranking scientific journals and conferences, and also attract funding from several national and international agencies. So in the last slide, I will talk a little bit of a specific case study that that is an experimental living lab at Santa Casa de Misericórdia de Lisboa. So Santa Casa de Misericórdia de Lisboa, founded in 1498, is the oldest and biggest social and philanthropic institution in Portugal, aiming to improve people's well-being as a priority for the most unprotected. So the Pro-Child Collab at Santa Casa will have at this moment three main outcomes: to foster familiar care system, adoption, and work with high-risk families at the community. The main projects regarding this bigger program, it will, regarding the foster familiar care system, the main objectives is to set up an innovative, high-quality foster family model as an alternative to children's institutionalization, monitoring and evaluating the implementation of this model, and scaling up this model of foster care to other institutions in Portugal. Regarding adoption, the objectives is to implement the child preparation program for adoption, to conduct an evaluation process and improvement of candidate families for child adoption, and develop an intervention model for post-adoption. Finally, the work with the high-risk families at the community, the main objectives is to assess and intervene in at-risk families and children, to foster scientific-based professional training by a board of national and international experts, and to perform a continuous and multi-level supervision. So this is an experimental living lab in which we will also be able to collect, integrate, and store and process data in real time, and that will serve in our platform as a decision support system capable of providing access to content on parenting, for instance, and child platform that congregates information regarding these programs, this training, and that they all can have access via the social intervention area. We also aim at, in this experimental living lab, to develop specific technology that will help to evaluate and monitor child and family welfare by using this digital technology, and for these specific apps will be developed, but also using these nanosensors in which we can obtain reliable markers of the biological and physical and psychological intervention programs. So regarding evaluation and intervention, apps will be created and developed to provide a better detection of health and trauma-related issues, early indicators of case progress or risk of failure, and program and system level learning. So to sum up, the Pro-Child will offer an unprecedented opportunity to boost an effective social change in Portugal, with children at the center of research and innovation, linking technology and social intervention under the methodology of living labs. It will be a collaborative network with a large pool of renowned academic researchers and private and public entities, with the support from leading governmental entities. An innovative multidisciplinary project with significant impact on the society as a whole by acting early upon poverty issues without over-relying on public funds will be fostered. Programs easily scalable in size and complexity through the increasing demands and supply. High-skilled hires promoting impactful services across all social contexts with clear accountability and measurable returns. Sustainable in 5 to 10 years through the execution of projects and the growth of donors, and will enhance better political decisions through science-based evidence. So Portugal will be on the map in regards to the fight against poverty and social exclusion in childhood by placing children first, building stronger families and a more equal society. So this is a challenge for the next years. And I would like to thank to all the associates, funders, and in particular to Professor Isabel Soares that conducted this very important collab and this very demanding project that will put children first. Thank you very much.